Hi, my name is Piper Ellison. I'm 32 years old, and this is my story. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? Not just overlooked, but treated like you don't belong, like your only worth is tied to what you can do for others, never who you are. Because that was my reality for most of my life. And one summer, while scrubbing floors in a lake house that wasn't mine, again, I made a silent vow. One day, I'm going to turn this humiliation into power. And trust me, I did. They called me the maid of the family. So I bought the resort where they've vacationed every single summer of their perfect lives. And I made sure they never forgot who they tried to erase. But let me take you back to the beginning, before I was a woman with enough resources to rewrite the script. Back when I was just the forgotten one, the errand girl, the shadow. I was born and raised in Charleston, West Virginia, the youngest of 4 siblings in the Ellison family. My father, Jack, owned a string of car dealerships across the state, and my mother, Marla, was the sort of woman who believed in appearances above all else. And when I say appearances, I don't mean manners or education. I mean pearls at breakfast and designer shoes for backyard barbecues. My siblings, all older than me by at least 6 years, fit perfectly into that glossy picture. Hunter, the golden boy, Celeste, the debutante turned influencer, and Patrick, the brainiac who became a lawyer straight out of Yale. And then, there was me, Piper. Quiet, bookish, always underfoot. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this story is speaking to you. You won't believe what comes next in this journey of revenge and redemption. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't dramatic. I was just different. I preferred art to accounting, silence to socializing. I never really fit in with the polished Ellison brand, which was why, by the time I was a teenager, I was already being asked to help set the table, volunteered to clean up after family events, and trusted to stay behind when everyone else went on glamorous trips. Trusted, that was my mother's favorite euphemism. "Piper's so dependable," she'd say, smiling at her friends while I carried trays and scrubbed wine stains from linen. By the time I was 20, it was clear. I had a role in the family, and it wasn't daughter. It was staff. That summer, they all went to Emerald Lake, this upscale resort in the mountains that our family visited religiously every July. Only this time, I didn't even get an invitation, not even a casual mention. I was left behind. Again. But they forgot one thing. I had nothing holding me back anymore. I wasn't in school. I didn't have a job. And I was tired of being the one they expected to fade into the background. So I showed up. I took the Greyhound from Charleston to Lewisburg, then hitchhiked the last leg of the trip. When I arrived at the gates of Emerald Lake Resort, dusty and sweating, I half expected security to turn me away. But something strange happened. A staff member, mistaking me for one of their new hires, handed me a cleaning cart and pointed me toward the main lodge. And I didn't correct him. For 3 days, I cleaned rooms. I made beds. I scrubbed tubs. And on the 4th day, I walked into the luxury Lakeview cabin where my family was staying. My mother was at the vanity, touching up her lipstick. My siblings lounged by the fire, complaining about the wine selection. No one recognized me at first. Not because I looked different, but because they simply didn't expect to see me there. Not as a guest. Not even as family. Just another maid. "Excuse me," Celeste said, not even looking up from her phone. "Can we get fresh towels?" That was the moment something inside me broke. Or maybe shifted. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I nodded, turned around, and walked out with the empty towel bin. And I made a decision right then and there. I would never be the help in this family again. The next 10 years of my life became a quiet, calculated climb. I worked double shifts at a local diner until I saved enough to enroll in business school. I studied marketing, hotel management, and real estate. I kept my head down, my circle small, and my goals sharp. While they were busy flaunting their curated lives on Instagram, I was building something real, something lasting. I got a job as an assistant manager at a small boutique hotel near Snowshoe. Within 2 years, I was managing the entire place. By 30, I was regional director for a growing chain of luxury mountain resorts. And I never forgot Emerald Lake. Every time I passed that billboard on the interstate with its photo-perfect view of the lake and the lodge nestled in the pines, I remembered the feel of that towel cart in my hands, the heat in my cheeks when my own mother asked me to clean her bathroom. So when the opportunity came to buy the land beneath that resort, when the owners faced a quiet bankruptcy and wanted to sell fast and quiet, I didn't hesitate. I bought it in cash. They never saw it coming. I didn't just buy the resort. I rebranded it. I renovated the cabins, redesigned the restaurant, and changed the logo. I made it a place of elegance and intentional luxury. But I kept one thing the same: the location of that one specific Lakeview cabin, the one my family had rented every year. And the next summer, when they tried to make their usual reservation, they were told the resort was under new ownership, and that the new owner had something special planned just for them. Of course they came. Curiosity always did get the best of my mother. I greeted them at the front desk wearing a sleek black suit and heels they wouldn't dare mock. I watched their faces slowly shift from confusion to disbelief. Hunter muttered, "Wait, is that?" Celeste's jaw dropped. My mother, ever the performer, offered a tight smile and a fake laugh, but her eyes were wide. "Welcome back to Emerald Lake," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "I hope you enjoy your stay." They stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. I didn't need to humiliate them. I didn't need to raise my voice. The look in their eyes, the realization that the maid had become the master, that was enough. But this wasn't the end. No, this was only the beginning. The moment they stepped into the lobby and saw me standing there, the air thickened with the weight of unspoken memories. It was as if time itself paused to acknowledge the irony of it all. And yet I smiled. The kind of smile you give a stranger when you're the only one who remembers what they did to you. They were dressed exactly as I remembered. My mother in her polished pearls and crisp beige blazer, Hunter in his weekend jeans that probably cost more than my rent back then, Celeste draped in effortless elegance, and Patrick still carrying that arrogant stiffness in his shoulders like he was above gravity. They hadn't changed a bit, but I had. They didn't ask for my story. They didn't wonder how I got here. Because people like them never ask questions when the answers might make them uncomfortable. Instead, they defaulted to their familiar, passive-aggressive charm. "Piper, this place is incredible," my mother said, her voice teetering between awe and disbelief. "You've done well for yourself." I nodded, accepting the half-compliment like a cold dish. "I thought you'd enjoy it," I said. "I made sure to upgrade the exact cabin you used to rent." Celeste looked around, fidgeting with her oversized sunglasses. "Do you still work here? Or you own it?" I cut in, watching the words land. Every part of it. That silence, that stunned, uncomfortable pause, that was what I'd worked for. That was the fuel that had kept me up on nights when I doubted myself, when I had to choose between paying rent or feeding myself properly. But I didn't want revenge to be a single moment. I wanted it to unravel slowly, one thread at a time. I had already laid the groundwork. Before their visit, I had instructed my staff, discreetly of course, to treat the Ellison reservation exactly as requested. No upgrades, no favoritism, no special treatment. Not bad service, just equal service. That was something they'd never experienced before, and it didn't take long for the cracks to show. "We asked for French Chardonnay, not Californian," Celeste snapped at the sommelier on the first night. "We only drink Bâtard Montrachet." "I'm sorry," the server replied with polite professionalism. "That wine is not currently offered in our standard package. However, you're welcome to upgrade." "Upgrade?" She nearly choked. "My family has been coming here for years." The server turned to me for backup, and I simply said, "I'm sure we can accommodate any guest request at the listed premium." I didn't have to yell. I didn't have to retaliate. The rules of the game had changed, and they were just now realizing it. By the third day, the frustration was setting in. Hunter had complained about the bedsheets, the pillows, even the lighting. My mother began offering unsolicited suggestions about the decor, as if I might thank her for her keen eye. Patrick, of course, said little, but the way he watched me was different now, calculating, as if he was trying to determine whether I was bluffing or if this was all real. That's the thing about people who live on top. They assume the bottom is where you stay. They don't imagine you could rise without them noticing. And when you do, they scramble to rationalize it. You probably got a lucky investor, I heard Patrick say to Hunter on the lodge balcony one evening. Or she married someone with money. I almost laughed. Because even now, the idea that I had built this on my own was too much for them to process. The next morning, I decided to stir the pot a little more. I invited them to a private brunch. Just the 5 of us on the edge of the lake, in the VIP gazebo reserved only for premium guests and owners. The table was set beautifully. White linens, crystal glasses, a full spread with quiches, croissants, smoked salmon, and mimosas. The staff, trained to perfection, floated in and out like ghosts, invisible yet essential. I made sure every detail screamed elegance, but not the kind they were used to. This wasn't about status. This was about intention. So, Piper, my mother began, eyeing the champagne bottle being opened by a young sommelier, what exactly made you decide on hospitality? Well, I said, folding my napkin neatly in my lap, I figured if I was going to be treated like the maid all my life, I might as well learn how to run the whole house. I sipped my mimosa. No one laughed. No one said a word. I wasn't trying to be funny. Celeste cleared her throat. That's a bit dramatic, don't you think? Not really, I replied. Do you remember the summer I showed up here and you asked me for towels? My mother blinked slowly. You were always so helpful, Piper. I was 18. Yes, she said, tilting her head. And very mature for your age. The way she said it made my stomach churn. That old deflection, that way she had of twisting shame into praise. It was part of her charm, part of what made me invisible in plain sight. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. You didn't raise me. You trained me. To serve. To stay quiet. To know my place. Well, I found a new one. That landed harder than I expected. Hunter shifted in his seat. Celeste bit her lip. Patrick put down his fork. And my mother, she smiled. Not kindly, not lovingly, but with that careful, performative elegance she always wore when backed into a corner. We're proud of you, Piper. Really. This is impressive. I smiled back. I didn't invite you here to impress you. I invited you to make you uncomfortable. The silence that followed was thick with tension. It wasn't loud, but it was deafening in its own way. They had no playbook for this version of me. I wasn't the wallflower they'd raised. I wasn't the afterthought. I was the woman who'd taken everything they'd denied her and built a kingdom. That night, after they'd retreated to their cabin, I walked the grounds alone. The air was crisp. The lake shimmered under the moonlight. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I needed to prove anything. But I also knew this wasn't over. Not yet. They still thought this was a power move, a moment, a spectacle. What they didn't realize was that I hadn't just bought the resort. I had changed the entire culture of it. No more favoritism, no more status-based treatment, no more people like me being made to feel less. And I was just getting started. Because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, strategic. And in the days to come, I was going to show them what it looked like when the maid writes the rules. The next morning began like any other, at least on the surface. The sun was bright over the lake, casting long golden rays through the mist rising off the water. It was picturesque, still, almost cinematic. But beneath that serenity, something inside me was shifting. For years, my ambition had been fueled by silent resentment and quiet humiliation. I had built every step of my success on the foundation of what they refused to give me: acknowledgement, respect, belonging. But now, standing in the very place that had once symbolized my invisibility, I felt a different kind of weight settle on my chest. A question I hadn't allowed myself to ask until now. What happens after the revenge is served? My staff had informed me that my family had made a special request that morning, a reservation for the spa followed by a private boat tour of the lake. It wasn't unusual, but the fact that it had come through Celeste made it suspicious. She had always been the strategist, the one who knew how to bend situations in her favor with a smile and a well-placed compliment. And sure enough, just after 10, I received a message from reception. Your sister would like to have lunch with you, alone, in the garden. I could have declined, but something told me I shouldn't. This wasn't just about power anymore. It was about understanding the enemy in her natural habitat. The garden was quiet, hidden behind a trellis of flowering ivy and shaded by an arch of weeping willows. Celeste was already seated at a stone table draped in linen, sipping something iced through a straw. She looked up as I approached, lowering her sunglasses with a performative elegance that hadn't aged a day. "Piper," she said, smiling faintly, "you've created something beautiful here." "I didn't do it for you," I replied, sitting down without ceremony. "I know," she said, studying me, "but you knew we'd come back someday." I narrowed my eyes. "You mean like how people return to crime scenes?" She gave a small laugh, but there was tension behind it. "You always were clever. I think we all underestimated that." I waited, letting the silence stretch. Celeste wasn't the kind of person to offer flattery without motive. "I'm not here to apologize," she said eventually. "None of us are good at that. But I do want to understand. When did we lose you?" I stared at her. "You didn't lose me. You never saw me to begin with." She didn't flinch. "Fair." We sat there for a moment, not speaking. The wind rustled the leaves overhead, and somewhere nearby, a bird chirped once, then fell silent. "I didn't know it was that bad," Celeste finally said. "I thought you were just quiet, comfortable in the background." "That's what you needed to think," I replied, because the truth, that I was being slowly erased, that I was begging to be noticed and constantly overlooked, didn't fit your image of our perfect family. She stirred her drink. "Maybe, but why now? Why this?" I looked her dead in the eye. "Because you taught me that silence gets ignored." This was the loudest thing I could do without raising my voice. Celeste nodded slowly, and for a moment, I saw something shift in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or regret, but it didn't last. Later that afternoon, something happened that changed everything. I received a call from the property's legal department. A man claiming to be Patrick's business associate had contacted them, asking about acquisition terms, about whether I'd be willing to sell. I felt the heat rise to my face before the sentence even finished. Sell? After everything I'd done to reclaim my dignity, they thought I'd just hand it over? I called Patrick's cell. He picked up on the third ring. "Hey, Pipes," he said casually, like we were catching up over coffee. "Everything okay?" "I got a call from a man named Jeffrey Hart," I said coolly. "Apparently he thinks this place is for sale." A pause, then, "Oh, yeah, I might have floated the idea. Thought maybe you'd want to cash out while things are hot." "Cash out?" "Yeah, I mean, it's impressive what you've done, truly. But resorts are tough. Overhead, staffing, seasonal traffic. I figured you might want to get ahead of—" "Stop." He did. I took a breath. "You still think this is about money." "It's always about money," he said, not even missing a beat. "No, Patrick, not for me. This was never about money. It was about respect, about memory, about identity." He sighed, and when he spoke again, his tone shifted. "Okay, then what do you want?" I didn't answer him, because I wasn't sure yet. All I knew was that his offer confirmed what I had always suspected. They still didn't see me. They saw an opportunity, a problem to neutralize. The following evening, during the resort's open-air jazz night, I made a decision. I stood at the edge of the terrace, looking out at the lake, the lights twinkling across the water, the murmur of conversation and soft music humming around me like a lullaby. My family sat at a table near the stage, laughing at something the bandleader had said, sipping wine they hadn't paid for, in a place they hadn't earned. And I realized, revenge wasn't one big moment. It was a series of small, deliberate choices. So I made one. I walked to the mic and asked the pianist to hold for a second. Then I turned to the guests, most of whom had no idea who I was, but that didn't matter. "Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to say a few words. Some of you know me as the owner of this resort, but I wasn't always. I grew up coming here, in a very different role." I glanced toward my family. My mother's smile froze. Patrick shifted in his seat. Celeste stared. For years, I was the one pouring drinks, folding towels, sweeping floors. Not because I was hired, but because I was expected to. Not by the staff, but by the people who should have loved me most. A hush fell over the terrace. I built this place not just to escape that history, but to reclaim it. Every table, Every room, every detail. I designed to remind myself that I'm worth more than what they made me feel. And if you've ever been made to feel small, invisible, or undeserving, this place is for you too. I stepped back, thanked the crowd, and walked off before the applause began. Behind me, I heard it anyway. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the balcony of my private suite and watched the sunrise over the water, the sky softening from purple to pink to gold. And for the first time since this all began, I felt something deeper than satisfaction. I felt peace. But deep down, I knew Patrick wouldn't let this go. I had embarrassed him, publicly, and if I knew anything about men like him, it was that they never forgive being exposed. And I was right. The next morning came with a sharpness I hadn't felt in years. Not from the cold or lack of sleep, but from awareness. The kind that clings to your skin like mist and whispers in your ear before you even open your eyes. Something had shifted. I could feel it. My assistant, Laura, knocked on the suite door just after 7 a.m. Her face was pale, her tone clipped. "You need to see this," she said, handing me her tablet. My heart sank before I even saw the screen. The local blog, the one that catered to upscale travelers and property investors, had published a story. Not just any story, a story about me. Emerald Queen or Mountain Mirage. How Piper Ellison rose from nowhere and might be headed back. It included blurry photos of me from my early days at the Snowshoe Hotel, pulled from social media I'd forgotten existed. Worse, it speculated that my resort was over-leveraged, my staff underpaid, and that I'd used family connections and emotional manipulation to get where I was. The entire piece dripped with the kind of poison that wasn't lethal right away, but if you let it spread, it could ruin everything. I knew instantly who had planted it. Patrick. The article was subtle enough to sound plausible, sharp enough to raise questions, and petty enough to carry his signature smugness. I stared out at the lake, rage simmering beneath my ribs. I had expected some resistance. I had not expected sabotage. Not this fast, not this public. But here's the thing about being underestimated your entire life. It teaches you how to adapt, how to prepare in silence while they gloat. So I didn't panic. I got dressed. I wore black slacks, a deep navy blouse, and pulled my hair back into a low bun. I looked like power, and when I walked into the morning operations meeting, I was ready to remind every single person in that room who they worked for and why. "Someone tried to make a joke out of me today," I told them, voice calm but firm. "But what they didn't understand is that I've built this place brick by brick. I've slept on floors, worked double shifts, and skipped meals to learn every angle of this business. No article can undo that. No lie can change it." I paused, looking at their faces. Some surprised, some inspired, but all loyal. "We don't chase approval," I continued. "We deliver excellence. And we're going to prove that again this weekend. Every room, every guest, every detail. Show them who we are." That night, I went to war. Not with fists or threats, but with strategy. I called the blog's editor-in-chief directly, told her I wanted to offer an exclusive follow-up. Not to defend myself, but to tell the full story. I invited her to the resort, gave her a behind-the-scenes tour, introduced her to my staff, people who had grown with me, cried with me, built this dream with me. And then I told her everything. The truth, the years of silence, the family who had mistaken cruelty for tradition, the grit it took to break the mold. By the time she left, she was quiet, reflective. A week later, a new piece appeared. The Maid Who Became Queen, the real story of Piper Ellison. No more backhanded praise, no veiled insults, just truth. But I wasn't done yet. I needed to go deeper. I needed to heal, not just from the article, but from years of being shaped by rejection. One evening, I found myself walking through the staff quarters. A housekeeper named Ruby was on break, sitting outside smoking a cigarette. She smiled at me, a little sheepish, as I sat next to her. "Rough day?" she asked. "Not the roughest," I replied. She looked at me for a moment. "You know, when I first started here, I didn't believe it. That the boss was a woman who used to be treated like us." I smiled. "You believe it now?" She nodded. "It shows. The way you fight. Not like someone who wants revenge, like someone who wants to make sure no one feels what you did. That hit me harder than any article ever could. Because it was true. Somewhere in my climb, I'd started to become the very thing I despised. Cold, calculating, obsessed with proving myself. But Ruby reminded me why I started. Not to humiliate, not to win, but to rewrite what power looked like. The next morning, I made some changes. I gave raises to every single housekeeper and server. I approved new maternity benefits for my staff. I partnered with a local women's shelter to offer job training programs within the resort. And for the first time since buying the place, I didn't feel like I was chasing a ghost. But Patrick wasn't done. A few days later, he requested a private meeting, said he wanted to clear the air. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met in my office at dusk. The windows glowed orange with the last breath of daylight. Patrick entered wearing his signature smirk, a folder tucked under one arm. "Before you say anything," he began, "you should know. I regret the article." I didn't expect it to blow up like that. I folded my arms. Didn't expect or didn't care. He gave a slow shrug. "Does it matter?" I stared at him, unblinking. "You're not here to apologize. What do you want?" He placed the folder on my desk. "I want in." I blinked. "In?" "As a partner, investor, whatever you want to call it. You're building something huge here. And like it or not, I know this world. I can help you scale it." I laughed. Actually laughed. "You tried to ruin me." He didn't flinch. "I tested you. You passed. I'm not a business school case study, Patrick." "No," he said. "You're a force, and that's why I want in. Let's bury the past. Build something big. Together." For a moment, the room felt smaller than it was. My childhood flashed behind my eyes. Birthday parties spent cleaning. Holidays spent alone. The sound of my name being forgotten in family introductions. And now this man, my own brother, wanted to invest in me. I stood, picking up the folder. I didn't come this far to share the win with the people who laughed at my losses. He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "I'll build this on my own. And when it grows beyond what you ever imagined, remember, I offered you nothing, and you earned even less." He left without another word. That night, I sat alone in the garden beneath a canopy of stars, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. And for the first time since this all began, I wasn't thinking about my family. I was thinking about my future. Because overcoming isn't just surviving, it's transforming. The wind was louder that night, louder than usual for late summer in Charleston. It rustled through the trees like a warning, a whisper that something was coming. I sat on the balcony of my suite, sipping tea and staring out over the lake. The lights from the cabins flickered across the water, distorted by the gentle ripples of the surface. There was beauty in it, serenity even, but inside me, something was boiling. My confrontation with Patrick had stirred more than anger. It had stirred memory. It had dragged out the shadows I had neatly tucked away in the corners of my past. The faces, the voices, the smirks that followed every small humiliation I'd endured for the sake of keeping the family together. But I wasn't a girl anymore. I wasn't the silent one, the overlooked one. I had earned the right to take up space. And now, that space was about to become even more significant. The very next day, a surprising call came through from one of the most exclusive hospitality development firms on the East Coast. They had seen the follow-up article about my rise, heard the buzz about my resort, and wanted to talk about expansion, about building a second Emerald Lake experience, this time in the Smoky Mountains. It wasn't just flattering. It was the kind of offer that could change everything. National attention, brand partnerships, real power. But it also came with a catch. I would need to open up the books, let them audit operations, staff practices, and every detail of the business. And I knew, without a doubt, that if I agreed, Patrick would find a way to sabotage it. He hadn't given up. I could feel it. He was quiet now, but only in the way that hurricanes are quiet before they reach the shore. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, I was called to the lobby for an unexpected situation. A staff member had found a guest crying in one of the side lounges, claiming something had been stolen from their room. That wasn't entirely uncommon, but when I walked down to handle it personally, What I found made my blood run cold. The guest was a blogger, a well-known one. She'd been invited on a comped stay to write about the resort. She claimed her laptop, containing all her notes and photos, had been taken while she was at dinner. The security team was already reviewing footage, but the timing couldn't have been worse. If word got out that a sponsored guest had been robbed, the expansion deal would be off the table, no question. And yet, something about the story didn't add up. The room hadn't been broken into, no staff keycards had been used, and the camera outside her room? Mysteriously disabled for exactly the 40-minute window she was at dinner. It felt orchestrated, and I only knew one person manipulative enough to pull something like that. I asked Lara to dig deeper. She pulled the guest's real name, ran a background search, and sure enough, she had links to one of Patrick's former firms. Not direct, but close enough. She wasn't a blogger. She was bait. That was the moment the storm in my chest turned into a full-force tornado. He wanted to ruin me publicly, not just through rumors or partnerships. He wanted to make me look incompetent, unsafe, unequipped to handle real expansion. So I did something I hadn't done since this all started. I called my mother. It rang twice before she answered, her voice clipped and suspicious. "Piper? I need you to listen," I said, "and I need you to be honest." She didn't speak. "Did you know Patrick was trying to sabotage the resort?" A pause. "I don't know what you're talking about." I sighed. "That's not true, and you know it." She said nothing. "Do you remember when I was 15, and you told me not to come to the lake because you needed help organizing things at home? You said the family would be better off if I stayed out of the way, that I was always causing friction. Still, she stayed quiet. Patrick is doing the same thing now, trying to erase me again. But this time, I'm not that girl, and you need to decide whose side you're on." After a long silence, her voice returned, low and sharp. "You always wanted everything to be about you, Piper." That was all I needed to hear. The call ended, and so did any remnants of hope that my mother would ever change. I went into lockdown mode. Not fear, not panic. Strategy. I gathered my top 3 managers and laid it out. What had happened, what it meant, and how we were going to respond. We initiated a sweep of the entire guest list, ran additional background checks, and increased security presence across the resort. But I also did something else. I wrote a letter, a personal one, addressed to the hospitality firm. I told them everything, not the dirt, not the drama, but the truth. I told them what it meant to build a legacy from the ashes of rejection. I told them about being underestimated, belittled, called a maid in my own home. I told them how that pain became the blueprint for a sanctuary, where no one would ever be made to feel less. I didn't know if it would work, but I wasn't afraid of losing anymore, because I had already lost the people who were supposed to love me. I could handle losing strangers. 3 days later, the blogger's story unraveled. She confessed when we threatened legal action, confirmed the connection to Patrick, confirmed the whole plan. We had it all in writing. I didn't press charges. I didn't need to. I sent the entire file to Patrick's law firm, and I copied the managing partners. I never heard from him again, but the next week, the hospitality firm called back. They were in, fully. They wanted a 10-year partnership, full funding. Creative control would remain mine. That night, I stood on the terrace overlooking the lake, champagne in hand, watching the fireflies flicker like stars just above the surface of the water. The guests were laughing by the fire pit. The staff moved like clockwork. The music was soft, steady, confident. And I, Piper Ellison, was finally exactly where I belonged. Not because I was invited, but because I built it. The smell of cedar and morning dew greeted me as I stepped outside just before sunrise. The lake was still, glass-like, as if nature itself were holding its breath in reverence to everything that had changed. And I had changed. I was no longer chasing redemption or recognition. I was simply being, existing in a place I created. A legacy born not from privilege, but from grit. From knowing what it feels like to be silenced, stepped over, and underestimated, and choosing to rise anyway. The resort was now entering its peak season, and every cabin was booked. There were families, couples, solo travelers. People who'd found our story online and wanted to experience what it meant to be somewhere built on healing rather than hierarchy. They came not just for comfort, but for the feeling that they mattered here. And they did. Because every detail of this place had been crafted by someone who had once been made to feel like she didn't matter at all. The partnership with the hospitality group was officially signed. Their team flew in the week after the incident with Patrick's planted blogger, and we walked the grounds together. They took notes, photos, asked thoughtful questions, but what struck them most was the atmosphere. "It feels intentional," one of them said. "Not just designed, but personal." It was. Every archway, every scent in the spa, every choice of music that played in the common areas, none of it had been left to chance. That was what made this place more than a resort. It was a declaration, a vow, that no one here would ever be invisible, that no one would ever be asked to disappear to make someone else shine. A few days later, as I finalized the plans for the second location in the Smoky Mountains, I received an envelope. No return address, just my name handwritten on the front in curling script I hadn't seen in years. Inside was a single piece of stationery and a photograph. The photo was old, worn on the edges, and showed my family at Emerald Lake when I was maybe 12. My mother sat front and center in a designer dress. Hunter and Patrick flanked her, both grinning like they'd just won something. Celeste looked bored, elegant, draped in a silk scarf and oversized glasses. And in the background, barely in the frame, was me, carrying a tray of drinks. The note read, "We never saw you. That was our mistake. Mom." There was no apology, not really. But for the first time, there was acknowledgement. I held the photo for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't feel vindicated, just calm, as if something inside me had finally exhaled. But I didn't reach out to her. I didn't send a thank you or a rebuttal, because the truth was, I no longer needed her to see me. I had learned to see myself. As the weeks passed, the energy around the resort shifted. Guests began leaving longer letters, not just reviews, notes about how their time here had changed them. A widow who rediscovered her love for painting after walking our forest paths. A young woman who found the courage to leave an emotionally abusive partner after reading the quote etched into the stones near the fire pit. "You are not here to shrink." That quote had once been scribbled in the margins of my old journal. During a night I cried myself to sleep in a basement apartment I could barely afford. I had promised myself back then that one day I would live a life big enough to hold all the parts of me. And now, others were living in it too. Laura, my assistant, had become more than just staff. She was a partner in every sense of the word. Fiercely loyal, smart, compassionate. One afternoon, we sat in my office finalizing next season's calendar. She looked up from her screen, her voice soft. "You know what I admire most about you?" she asked. "You built this without needing revenge to look like rage." I smiled. "Rage built the foundation," I said. "But healing finished the house." Patrick never reached out again. Hunter sent a congratulatory email after the second resort was announced, short and stiff. Celeste sent flowers. I didn't answer any of them. I didn't need to. I wasn't looking to mend what never existed. I was building forward. The day the Smoky Mountain property officially broke ground, I stood at the edge of the cleared land and placed a small box in the soil. Sealed tight, waterproof, but real. Inside was that old photo my mother had sent me. And a note of my own. "This is the last time you get to live rent-free in my memory." I buried it deep before the construction crews arrived. It wasn't bitterness. It was release. I had no more room for ghosts. Back at the lake, my original resort remained a sanctuary. Not just for guests, but for me. Every night I took a walk through the grounds. Sometimes with a cup of tea, sometimes just in silence. The wind would dance through the trees, and the lake would shimmer, and I'd remember what it took to get here. The bruised silence, the long nights, the doubt, but also the fire. The moment I walked into their cabin with a towel cart and decided never again, that spark had become a wildfire, and it had cleared the path for everything that came after. One evening, near the end of the season, a little girl stopped me on my walk. Maybe 7 years old, freckles, messy curls. She looked up at me like I was magic. "Are you the boss here?" she asked. I crouched beside her and smiled. Yes, I am. My mommy said you made this place from scratch, she whispered. She said you used to be sad, but now you made a happy world. I swallowed a lump in my throat. I did, I said. And now it's for everyone who wants to feel happy too. She threw her arms around me without warning, then ran off giggling toward the fire pit. That moment stayed with me, not because it was dramatic or big, but because it was the kind of moment I used to think only happened to other people. People whose stories mattered, people who got invited to the table, but I had built my own table, and now others sat with me, unafraid, seen, whole. A few weeks later, I stood once more on the balcony of my suite, the autumn leaves painting the hills in shades of fire and gold. The resort was quiet again, off-season, but still alive in its bones. And I realized I wasn't just healed. I was home. A year passed, then another. Time didn't slow down to honor my transformation. It didn't pause to reflect on how far I'd come. It just kept moving. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't running to keep up with it. I was walking at my own pace. I was choosing the path, and the woman I had become, Piper Ellison, resort owner, legacy builder, silent storm turned sunrise, was no longer trying to prove anything to anyone, not to my family, not to strangers, and not even to myself. The second resort in the Smoky Mountains opened with a private ceremony on a warm spring afternoon. The mountains stood tall around us, proud and ancient, as if nodding in quiet approval. We named it Echo Ridge, a place designed not to be loud, but to reflect. A space for people who'd lost their voices somewhere along the way. And already, it was drawing attention. The guests weren't just travelers looking for comfort. They were people seeking peace. Women rebuilding after divorce. Veterans healing from trauma. Young artists rediscovering creativity. The resort wasn't a luxury. It was a balm, a breath, a soft place to land. I often spent time between the two locations now. My life became fluid. 1 week in the mountains, the next by the lake. I'd walk the halls at night, talking to guests, listening to their stories, sharing pieces of mine when it felt right. And without fail, someone always asked the same thing. Why did you build all this? And I'd smile, slow and soft, and say, because no one should have to earn love through silence. That answer always landed somewhere deep. They'd nod, sometimes tear up, sometimes hug me without a word. And every time I knew I had done more than survive. I had created meaning, but with healing came the unexpected, forgiveness. Not because it was deserved, not because I'd forgotten, but because carrying my past on my back like armor had started to feel heavy. I was tired of wearing pain like a badge, so I chose to let go. Not all at once, not publicly. It started with Hunter. He showed up one day unannounced, walking through the front gates of Emerald Lake like he wasn't sure if he'd be welcomed or removed. He'd aged. The confident lines in his face had softened. His eyes looked less sure. When I met him in the lounge, he stood awkwardly by the fireplace before finally saying, I read your interview in Forbes, the one where you said you stopped waiting for the invitation and built your own door. That hit me hard. I waited. I think about what we did to you, what we let happen, and how we kept calling it normal. I don't expect you to forgive us, but I want to say that I see you now. I really do. I didn't respond right away. I just watched him, studied him. You don't get a seat back at my table, I said, but I appreciate you acknowledging that you never earned one to begin with. He nodded. He didn't argue. He just sat down beside me, not across. That mattered. Over time, others followed. Celeste sent a letter that didn't ask for reconciliation, just told me she'd started therapy. Patrick never reached out, but that was fine. Some people rot behind their own masks. I didn't need to peel his off anymore. Lara eventually became the director of operations for both resorts. She ran the day-to-day like a general in heels, firm but fair, beloved by staff and guests alike. We built more than a business. We built a movement. Soon, we were being invited to speak at conferences, lead panels, consult on other hospitality projects. But no matter how high we climbed, the core stayed the same, the people. And one day, I met someone. His name was Aiden. He was a contractor, quiet and kind, the kind of man who didn't fill silence just to hear his own voice. He'd been hired to help with a restoration project on the original Emerald Lake docks. Our first conversation was short. Our second was easier. By the third, I found myself telling him stories I hadn't shared with anyone. Stories about scraped knees, burnt dinners, the nights I stayed up drawing floor plans of houses I'd never live in, and he listened. Not to fix, not to correct, just to understand. One evening, we sat by the water under a sky full of stars. He looked at me and said, "You don't carry your story like it's broken. You carry it like it's sacred." I didn't answer. I just leaned into him, and for the first time in forever, I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt like a woman, whole, present, loved. We didn't rush into anything. That wasn't who I was anymore. But slowly, he became part of my rhythm, not because I needed him, but because I wanted someone who saw the world like I did, through the lens of resilience, not perfection. The resorts continued to grow. A third location was being scouted in Colorado. We launched a foundation that offered scholarships for women in hospitality. We built mentorship programs. We funded therapy grants. The name Ellison was no longer a weight. It was a lighthouse. One afternoon, I returned to Charleston for a local business award ceremony. I hadn't been back in a long time. Walking through the city felt strange, like flipping through a photo album of someone else's life. But when I stood on the stage and looked out over the crowd, I saw more than just faces. I saw versions of myself, the ones who had stayed, the ones who had left, the ones still waiting to feel seen. In my speech, I said this: I used to think that being invisible meant I had nothing to offer, that the world would never notice if I disappeared. But then I learned something powerful. Sometimes the quiet ones are just waiting for the right moment to roar. And when they do, it echoes. The applause that followed wasn't the reward. The real reward was the silence that came just before. The moment when everyone was listening, really listening. That was everything I had ever wanted. Back at Emerald Lake that night, I walked alone through the quiet halls of the main lodge. My steps echoed softly on the polished floor. The air smelled like lavender and cedar. I paused at the mirror near the entrance, the same one that used to reflect the girl no one noticed. Now, it showed a woman who didn't need anyone's permission to exist. I whispered to her, "We did it." She smiled back. This wasn't just my revenge. It was my revolution, and I had only just begun. Have you ever been treated like an outsider in your own family, made to feel small, like your only worth was in serving others? If this story resonated with you, comment below and share your own experiences. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more powerful stories of reclaiming identity and self-worth. Share this with someone who's still searching for their voice. Remember, you don't need permission to exist. You only need the courage to take your space. Thank you for listening to my story.